Good morning. It is now 9 and I think we'll go ahead and get started. I can see that Clarissa Stebbing and Tanya Albornoz have joined us. I am going to start this morning with just a 3-minute mindfulness guided meditation. I had hoped to get us another guest speaker, but wasn't able to get that organized in time. So bear with me here as I exit out of the PowerPoint and get into the recording. All right, so I will go ahead and start the audio and then flip back to the PowerPoint, but it is a guided meditation, and if you're comfortable, you're welcome to close your eyes as we go through.
A 3-minute guided meditation. Close your eyes and simply become aware of your breathing. We're going to use the breath to bring you into the present moment. Inhaling through the nose and exhaling through the nose. As you inhale, feel cool air coming into the body and nurturing. As you exhale, feel warm air leaving the nostrils, releasing any tension and negative emotion. Feel your feet connecting you to the earth. Feel your shoulders sinking down. And feel your neck elongating. Relax your forehead, your eyes, your jaw, your ears, and relax all the muscles of the neck. Come back to the breath. Coolness on the inhalation, bringing you into the present moment. Exhalation, the warm air leaving, knowing you are safe, relaxed. Quieten your mind. And thoughts go by like white, fluffy clouds in a blue sky. Your attention back to your breath. Releasing yourself from the past and from the future. Fully enjoying this present moment. Cultivating an inner peace. A safe place for you to come. Breathe. And slowly open your eyes and come back.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think we are ready to get started. Sorry, I should have shown you this slide before I got going. We just listened to a YouTube video that was, I didn't write her name down, but here is the link. I'm so sorry. I will share that out in our follow-up email, as well as some other YouTube links I found this week and showed my teenagers and got some success with. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing and we will turn the time over to Tanya Albornoz. Give me just a minute here to get that organized. organized. Right, Tanya, you should be able to take over.
Got it. Thank you, Amanda. Did you want me to just introduce myself?
Oh, Tanya, I'm so sorry. We are not on it today. Thank you for helping me. I definitely wasn't ready for today somehow. So give me just a minute before you take over, Tanya. Let me go ahead and share what I put together here. So if you'll stop sharing, I'll pop in.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. Let's see why am I not seeing our share menu? There we go. All right. Okay, you guys should be seeing the PowerPoint again. So Tanya is new to USBE. She's been with us since January, and she's working as a prevention specialist with Brian Olmstead's team. Prior to joining USBE, she worked for a little over 20 years in child welfare. Early in her career, she worked both as a caseworker and a child welfare, oh man, I can't say this one, ombudsman.
Ombudsman, yes.
Thank you. For the last 11 years, she held the position as the Foster Care Program Administrator for the Division of Child and Family Services, which included responsibilities such as training caseworkers and stakeholders, writing law and policy, overseeing contracts with partners, and researching and implementing best practice to improve Utah's child welfare system. During her time as a foster care program administrator, Ms. Albornoz passionately worked to improve educational outcomes for children in foster care and dedicated much of her energy to educating the foster care community and partners about the effects of trauma and how to counteract trauma by increasing protective factors. Tanya recently finished her master's degree in social work at the University of Utah and is a mother to 3 beautiful daughters. I want to congratulate Tanya again on her master's degree. I know as a working parent, that is an amazing challenge to accomplish, and I think it's something we should celebrate. So with that, now I will go ahead and turn it over to Tanya.
Thank you, Amanda.
You're welcome.
Let me just get set up here.
And yes.
Oops. Okay. So today I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite topics to educate people on, and that is trauma. Today I'm going to try to give a little bit of a spin on it, maybe throw in some things that you haven't heard before. Much of this information you might have heard in other trainings. I know a lot of you have been through many trauma trainings, but I did try to throw in some things at the end that might be a little bit different spin on things. Some of you may never have had any trauma training before. So I'm trying to, with this presentation, span the width and breadth of all of the experience of you out there. So if this is largely a review for you, that's just great. It's always great to review how trauma-informed interactions are important for the students we work with. If it's a first time for you, that's fine as well. That's great. Thanks for being here. So I like to start with the why with any presentation that I do. Why learn about trauma? And that's because over 1/2 of all the students that you work with will have experienced a traumatic event by the time they reach adulthood. That's the latest information out by the National Traumatic Stress Network. And just in 2008, they had said 1/4. So this has doubled in the last 10 years or so. What do you think this number is now? You can throw that in the chat box, going through COVID-19 and all of that. One thing I want to say about this, though, is that the students that you are all working with, you can probably assume that 100% of them have experienced traumatic events in their lives. So children with these experiences exhibit learning and behavioral issues related to the way trauma influences their brain development, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. And it's important to treat every child with compassion and consider the roots of their actions, and not so we're looking at The approach should not be what is wrong with you, but instead should be what happened to you and or what didn't happen for you. This is a paradigm shift that we're trying to move towards, especially in education, so that people understand if a child is acting out, it's not because they're a bad child per se, but it's because something didn't happen to them that should have, or something happened to them that shouldn't have. So this is one of my favorite quotes. The children who need the most love will often ask for it in the most unloving ways. I found that that's a powerful way to teach trauma to educators, to teachers, to administration, and to explain to them that trauma is just the beginning of the story, and just because a child has been through traumatic events doesn't mean that we can't make a difference. So we'll talk a little bit about tools today to help you make a difference in these youth lives, even though they have been through, many of them, very pervasive trauma. Also, by the way, if you have questions, feel free to put those in the chat and I'll do my best to answer them. Okay, understanding trauma. Two of the most important things is that what happens in childhood doesn't always stay in childhood, and we'll explain that a little bit more in a moment. Also, children who experience early childhood trauma do not just get over it. They need to have treatment, they need to have healthy relationships, and trauma is best treated in the context of healthy relationships. That's where you all come in. Trauma is not something that they can just get over easily by being positive. It requires treatment, but it also requires those healthy relationships, all of which we'll talk about in a moment. So what is trauma? Most of you know what trauma is, but I just wanted to define it. The definition is that it's a deeply distressing or disturbing experience that happens to someone. In general, it can be defined as a psychological emotional response to an event or an experience that is deeply distressing or disturbing and causes a lasting impact on the individual's mental and emotional stability. Everyone that goes through a trauma processes it differently. It's the lens that they see the trauma through that's important. It's their perception. It's not the actual event. So one thing I'll probably emphasize a couple times in today's presentation is that it's not necessary for you to know the type of trauma that the child has experienced. It's just necessary for you to know how to kind of understand that they've perceived these events as traumatic experiences. Can you give me some brief examples of traumatic experiences that you know of that the youth you serve have experienced in their lives? You can throw those in the chat. It also doesn't matter how many experiences they've gone through. It could be multiple layers of traumatic experiences, or it could be just one trauma experience. If we find that it affects children the same, no matter how many quantity of traumatic experiences they've gone through. Oops, I was trying to get to the chat. Let's see. Abuse, homelessness, sex abuse, absolutely. Parent incarcerated, drug abuse, witnessing violence, rejection by parents or peers, definitely. And the removal, yes, the removal from their home. You can safely assume that any child in foster care or in JJS has gone through pervasive trauma, like I said before. Thank you for those examples. Let's see. Okay. I'm going to briefly talk about some of the different types of trauma, just so that you understand a little bit about the difference between these. Lots of people refer to these interchangeably, but there is a difference, and there's an important distinction that I'll touch on. These types of trauma can overlap. They're not mutually exclusive to one another. So just understand that an event can be more than one of these types of trauma. An acute trauma results from a single incident that could directly or indirectly impact the individual. Examples of directly impacting are ones that happen directly to them or that they witness. Could be a car accident, could be natural disaster, could be a rape or a sexual assault. It could also be an indirect type of trauma. We saw a lot of indirect acute trauma with 9/11. Many children and adults that went through 9/11 exhibited acute trauma symptoms and needed treatment for that. So those are some examples. Another type of trauma you may or may not have heard of is insidious trauma. This is trauma that's not directed at the individual, but it's all around the individual. Some people might refer to this as environmental trauma. Examples of this might be neighborhood violence, things that are going on in their neighborhood like gang activity, children that come from war-torn regions. You also get this with poverty and oppression. So if they come from a marginalized population, you can see insidious trauma working its way into that child's life. Right now, this would apply to children who live in hotspots for COVID-19, like New York. That type of trauma that's all around them can be referred to as insidious trauma. And some consider this a subcategory of the next type of trauma, which I'll talk about, which is chronic trauma. Chronic trauma is repeated, frequent, and prolonged exposure to traumatic events, such as domestic violence, neglect, or abuse. And these events may be layered and it may be varied. It could be one of these, it could be multiple of these. I'm sure you've seen examples of kids that you work with that have had chronic trauma and have had multiple layers of trauma. The last type of trauma, though, what research has found is this type of trauma is the most damaging. And so this is the one that we're mostly referring to with children in foster care. Complex trauma is trauma due to the inactions or actions of the primary caregiver or the attachment figure. So these are the people that these children should be able to trust to take care of them. They're the ones that they should be able to securely attach to, but they're not getting something from them. They're not getting those interactions positive. They're not getting the attachment activities that you see in other healthy children. And complex trauma seems to have the most profound lifelong impact on people. What they've found in the brain research is that, and we'll talk about this a little bit and watch a video on this, but the resources that the brain would be using to develop during childhood and those times where they're undergoing complex trauma are being used to survive. So they're not being able to go through those developmental stages that they need to go through. Instead, they're spending all of their time in survival mode. And then they are especially affected in their social skills and relationship skills. And these are, they have unhealthy, unsafe, or non-existent relationship skills. And this is, it occurs when there's no secure attachment. So let me just give you a quick example of how one type of incident might apply in each of these. So if you use the example of bullying, it could happen to a child one time, and that would fall into the acute trauma category. It could happen to a child who's maybe a part of a minority population or oppressed or marginalized population. So every time they walk outside of their house, they experience that oppression or marginalization. That would be insidious trauma. It could also happen repeatedly and frequently to the child, and that would be chronic trauma. But complex trauma would be when the caregiver themselves are directing the bullying to the child. So the child comes home every day, and instead of feeling loved and secure and safe, they're being belittled by their own caregiver, and that's the example of complex trauma. If you have any questions about the different types of traumas, throw them into the chat. Okay, so there's a couple of videos I wanted to show you. One of them is 2 minutes long and one of them is 6 minutes long. I'd like for you to watch these. I'm going to throw the links in the chat so that you can watch them on your own, because when we were testing out the sound yesterday, it wasn't working really well. So if you see in your chat box, I've put a couple links in there. I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to watch both of these videos. It's 9:20, so when you're done watching them, just kind of say in the chat box that you're done. So I kind of get a feel for when people are done. So go ahead and click on those links and watch it, and we'll come back together at about 9:30. All right, for the sake of time, I think we're going to be able to, I think we need to probably move on. Let's see. So if you want to share some thoughts about what stood out to you as you watched those videos in the chat, what was new to you? What did you learn, or what did you relearn as you were watching those two videos? This is about the quickest lesson on neuroscience I could give to you about why trauma affects the brain. And a couple things I just want to reiterate or point out is that if they don't have those early connections with caregivers especially, then those synapses don't develop. If they're not able to practice those, they're not able to grow, then those synaptic connections don't strengthen, they don't develop. And that's important because it's basically showing that what we know from Maslow's hierarchy of needs is true. And neuroscience is basically proving that Maslow's hierarchy of needs is something that's really important for us to consider when we're talking about trauma. Does anyone want to share anything? If you do, go ahead and stick it in the chat. Think about this video these videos in terms of the kids that you serve. How many of them probably did not have those connections with those healthy connections with adults as they were growing up, and even still probably today. Especially if there was substance abuse happening in their home, which many of these kids have, they're not having those attachment interactions. And so that substance use in the home, along with any mental health challenges that a parent might be experiencing, or any trauma that they themselves, the parents, haven't addressed, that creates these environments of complex trauma that these children are dealing with over and over again. So in trauma, like I said, perception is everything. We can't assume that we know what has or has not traumatized the child. We need to be really curious. It's the perception of the child that matters most. Traumatic events definitely leave a mark, but they affect everyone differently. For example, there was a child I was working with that her father was incarcerated, and everyone was making the assumption that she was experiencing trauma and behavioral issues because her parent was incarcerated. But when you talk to her about it, she actually felt like that was a good thing because the father was no longer in the home, he was no longer presenting a danger to her, and the reasons for her behavioral issues were otherwise. So that's just a reminder that you need to make sure to check with the child what their perception is of the events that are happening to them. For example, children might experience foster care differently as well. Okay, let's talk about ACEs really fast. I'm not going to spend very much time on this because I know many of you have heard a lot or have had many trainings on ACEs, have talked about ACEs. In the ACE study, if you haven't heard of it, is the Adverse Childhood Experience Study. And this study was conducted in 1995 to 1997. And they had about 18,000 participants in the ACEs study. And what they wanted to find out was, is there any type of link between an adverse childhood experiences and later health issues in life, health or emotional challenges later in life. So when they did the ACEs study, they asked about 3 different types of adverse childhood experiences, and you can see those categories here. So they asked about abuse, neglect, and household challenges. And as we learned in that video, neglect is the most damaging, and neglect is probably present in almost every single child welfare case that of children that you work with. So these are the types that they asked about, and what they found is that 64% of the population back in 1995 to 97 had at least one ACE. And that's a large percent of the population. So then what they did was they took that data and they cross-referenced it to health outcomes. And what they found was very surprising to them back then. They had no idea, or they had no proof before they did the ACE study, that as the number of adverse childhood experiences increase, so does the risk for negative health outcomes. So the more ACEs that they have, the more negative health outcomes they have. And some of the examples of some of these negative health impacts include behavioral impacts and physical and mental health impacts, which you can see right here. So if you have experienced adverse childhood experiences, not only do they have behavioral problems in childhood, but as they grow, they also have higher incidence of diabetes, depression, suicide, heart and liver, cancer, stroke, all of that. You can learn more about the adverse childhood experience study if you don't know much about it by just Googling it. There's a whole website devoted to the study. There's also a website called ACEs No More that talks about this and how it can apply to the children that we work with. But one of the things that I just want to reiterate with ACEs is that as the number of ACEs increase, they actually found that they have an earlier death. So they actually died 20 years earlier if the ACEs were not addressed. On average, they died 20 years earlier than their peers. And then from this study, they found that adverse childhood experiences are the single greatest unaddressed public health threat facing our nation today. But I want to point out a couple things about the ACEs study that I always like to point out. These studies were done in 1995 to 1997, and they were done with mostly white, educated, older individuals who had jobs. They had access to healthcare. And what do we know about other populations that might not be white, educated, and middle class? They have a higher incidence of adverse childhood experiences because they're members of oppressed populations and marginalized populations. So just know that children that come from these backgrounds, other than white, middle class, and educated, probably have a higher incidence, if not the highest incidence, of ACEs in their lives. And also, it was done in 1995 to 1997, and we have had significant historical events and other types of events happen since then. So the incidence of ACEs in our population is much greater today than it was from this study. The types of ACEs that they asked about are not the only types of ACEs. That's another thing that people forget. So, like I said, perception is everything. So there could be adverse childhood experiences not included in the ACE study that could be affecting the child. Okay, that's a lot. If you have any questions about any of that, throw your questions into the chat. But basically, this is what happens in later life. These are the later impacts of early childhood experiences of trauma. And many of the children that you work with, I can let you know, have been, even if we don't know about it, even if they've never been asked about it, they have been victims of early childhood adverse experiences. So they'll have hypersensitivity to stressors, problems with trust, difficulty interpreting emotional responses, impulsivity, continual dysregulation, and patterns of intense, unstable relationships. I'm sure that you probably recognize some of this in the children that you serve. Okay, there was this really great article on weareteachers.com that talks about 10 things about childhood trauma that every teacher needs to know, and I adapted it to this presentation because I thought it really had some great points. So kids who have experienced trauma are not trying to push our buttons. This is a great thing to help educators especially understand. Kids who have been through trauma worry about what is going to happen next. So it's really hard for them to concentrate on learning and being creative if they're worried about where they're going to sleep tomorrow, or if they're going to move to a new home, or where they're going to get their next meal. Even if the situation doesn't seem that bad to you, it's how the child feels that matters, like we've talked about with perception already. Trauma is not always associated with violence. So examples of this might be divorce, parent incarceration, an illness or death that they've gone through, bullying, emotional and verbal abuse. So it's not always associated with something that's violent or that's physically affects them. You also, like I said before, don't need to know exactly what caused the trauma to be able to help them. Kids who experience trauma need to feel they are good at something and can influence the world. These kids have been told over and over again that they're worthless, that they're nothing, or made to feel that way. Like I said, did not, like we talked about earlier, they have not had their needs taken care of. They have experienced extreme neglect. So they need to feel like they're good at something, and we can influence that. Self-regulation is a major challenge for these students, like we talked about. They didn't learn those self-regulation or coping skills because they were stuck in fight, flight, or freeze, or in survival mode. Also, it's okay to ask kids what you can do to help them to make it through the day. So if there's something bothering them or something that you can do to help them, they don't have to go into depth about their trauma, but you can ask them, what can I do to help you make it through the day? You can support kids with trauma by helping them build protective factors and by educating others about the effects of trauma and the importance of protective factors. And I do a whole other training on protective factors, and Amanda and I are looking at setting that up for you guys. It's much longer than I can go into today, but protective factors they're finding can actually counteract the effects of trauma. And it's one of the remedies for trauma. So we think it's important to maybe review some of the protective factor information with you. There's a direct connection between stress and learning. And I want to talk about this a little bit more. I can't ask you questions. I am so used to being interactive, but if you have seen this brain model before, it's based on Dan Siegel's brain model, the connection between stress and learning. So the brain basically has three parts of it, and you can see right there the executive state, the emotional state, and the survival state. And it starts from the brain development starts from the bottom up. And so if they're stuck in survival mode, that's always going to trump the learning brain. They can't move up to the executive state. They can't learn. They can't be creative. They can't grow if they're stuck in survival. Also, the emotional state, which is in between, which connects the survival and the executive, if that is highly regulated by emotions, and if they don't feel safe and secure and loved, they also cannot move into that creative learning mode. So hopefully that helps you understand why some of these kids who have been traumatized, who are stuck in that fight, flight, or freeze, or in that survival mode, just are not able to learn until they're able to regulate themselves and move into that executive or the higher brain functioning. They need to feel safe and supported to do that. Okay. That should probably remind you again of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I know you've talked about this in the Check and Connect training, but again, if they don't have the psychological things that they need, food, clothing, water, sleep, they can't move up in this pyramid. If they don't feel safe, they can't move up. Love and belonging. So they can't build self-esteem, they can't be creative. It's really difficult for them to function at these higher levels of the pyramid without having those basic needs. Okay. Many of you have asked me in the past how we can help children. Trying to see what your comments are. If there's a comment that I need to address, Amanda, would you please let me know? many of you have asked me about ways that you can teach children about this brain functioning. And I just threw into this PowerPoint Dan Siegel's hand model. He uses his hand to demonstrate this to kids. And what they found is if you can explain this kind of functioning to kids so that they understand that when they are dysregulated, angry, upset, those types of things, they're working from the lower part of their brain, then and then they do what we call flipping their lid. They're unable to connect their lower part of their brain to their upper part of their brain. If you can help kids understand that, then they have a vocabulary for talking when they're dysregulated. And it goes a long way to helping them develop coping skills. So
I need to jump in for 10-minute warning, my friend.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm going to jump right into a couple of tools then that you can use with these students, and I'm going to go really fast. So the first one you may or may not heard of is the windows of tolerance. This goes right along with what I was saying about the brain, that all of us have what we call a window of tolerance. This is when we're in the optimal functioning state, when we can access reason and emotion. And if we're getting upset or emotionally distressed, we're unable to calm down, we go into what's called hyperarousal. If we start shutting down and getting depressed and lethargic, we're in hyperarousal. We're outside of our window of tolerance. This is a great tool in teaching adolescents, especially youth, about coping skills and why they're important, and why when they're dysregulated and they get upset, they can't seem to calm down. They have a smaller window of tolerance. Victims of trauma have smaller windows of tolerance than a child who's grown up in a loving home. So what we need to do is help them increase their window of tolerance by teaching them coping skills. And we're going to talk about some of those ways to do that right now. So again, helping youth understand the trauma and how their past experiences have affected them is a great way, giving them that language and that understanding of what we've just kind of talked about today, how their past experiences has affected their brain development, but also giving them hope that they can move past that. There's a great resource that I have at the end of this PowerPoint presentation that helps explain complex trauma to kids. That you can access and print out. It's from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, that helps kids understand the effects of trauma on them. I hope you'll be able to access that and use that with some of the kids that you work with. Second, train the kids in self-regulatory and executive functioning skills. Try to focus on insight, empathy, and coping skills. Executive functioning skills are things such as self-awareness, nonverbal and verbal working memory, emotional self-regulation, being motivated, and one of the most important is helping them build empathy for others. If you can help them learn how to be empathetic for others, that will go a long way into building their executive functioning skills. 3, teach strategies for how they can reassess a stressful situation and consider alternatives. So basically we're talking about planning and problem-solving skills and conflict resolution skills. And in order to do this, these kids need lots of modeling from you, and they need role play. I know the kids probably hate role play, but the more you role play and practice with them, the more that they can build these skills that will help them navigate these stressful situations and remain within their window of tolerance. Number 4, teach them strategies for recognizing and interrupting automatic responses. Those automatic responses are like anger, becoming dysregulated, becoming depressed, those types of things. So you started out today's session with a great one, which is mindfulness. Mindfulness is a great thing to teach kids, to give them the skills to help them calm down before they get too upset. Deep breathing is also a really great way. If you can get a kid, the fastest and easiest way to get a kid to slow down and self-regulate if they're becoming dysregulated is to get them to take deep breaths. And you can actually model that with them and do that with them. And the reason that's important is you want to get oxygen to their brain, because they're not able to think clearly unless that oxygen is circulating in their brain. And grounding techniques are another thing that you may or may not have heard of. These are physical techniques that use the 5 senses or tangible objects to help you move through distress. So a really basic grounding technique is to teach them that when they're getting upset, before they get too upset, one of the things that we do, say in therapy with kids, is teach them to feel their fingertips and just rub their finger back and forth across their fingertips and just concentrate on that feeling for a few moments to help them calm down. And there's lots of different grounding techniques that you can Google and teach the kids. You don't have to be a therapist to do that. 5th one is to help them identify future goals. Motivational interviewing, which Clarissa is going to talk about in a little bit, is a great one to help them identify what their future goals are. Optimism for the future is one of the top 3 indicators for good mental health for children that they've been able to show through research. If a child has optimism, has future goals, then they're more likely to be successful. They have something to work towards. So that's really definitely very important to help them identify and work towards those future goals. The 6th one is connecting them to spirituality. Now, a lot of kids don't understand that spirituality is different than religion. They think that when you talk to them about spirituality, you're referring to a specific church or a specific religion or religious practices. But you should be talking to them about in spirituality more in terms of, this is what helps you connect you to the human spirit rather than material physical things. This is what brings you meaning, purpose, peace in your life. It could be a religion, but it could also be serving others is what brings them, is their spirituality. Nature can be someone's spirituality. And this is the 2nd thing that they've shown through research makes a difference in kids. So if they have optimism towards the future and an orientation towards a spirituality, those 2 things, along with this 3rd one that I'm going to talk about in a second, are the 3 indicators of success, highest indicators of success. So the 3rd one is that they participate in activities that they like. I know that many of you connect the kids to activities, extracurricular or hobbies. So it's really important that they have an activity that they like. Like I said, it can help them feel like they can accomplish something in the world, that they can do something right. So those 3 things are some of the most important things you can do. 7, celebrate small actions and successes. Like we said, they don't get many celebrations in their life. So if we can help them even celebrate that they were able to make it to class 5 minutes earlier than they did the day before, that is a great success that you can celebrate with them, and it reinforces to them, it's positive reinforcement. Number 8, increased relationship and social skills. So work with them again on increasing relationship and social skills. 9, teach them the power of communication and I statements. This is an important one because many kids don't have the language to be able to express how they're feeling, and instead it comes out again from anger, or it's directed towards other people. So if we can help them understand that they need to say, I feel, or I need, rather than, well, you're just making me so mad. If we can help them learn those communication skills and also name how they're feeling, then it's shown through research to be able to help them tame those feelings. So if they can say, I'm feeling very upset because I wanted to spend time with you, rather than, you don't think I'm important because you don't want to spend time with me, that can go a long way into helping them stay regulated and within their window of tolerance. Number 10, check the 4 S's regularly. So you need to make sure that they're safe, they're feeling safe, that they're feeling soothed or connected, basically, that they're feeling seen, and that they're feeling secure. help them reframe themselves as something other than victims. This is an important one as well. Maybe you need to let them define themselves. So maybe it's that they're a survivor, maybe it's they're a fighter, maybe it's that they're a hero. Help them understand that they have lived through a lot, and it's helped them become strong. And the last one is, again, building protective factors and helping them practice a strength-based perspective. And again, we have a whole training that we'll be doing on protective factors at a future point. If you have any questions on any of these things, you can feel free to reach out to me and I can expound more on it. There's some environmental level approaches, but I know are we getting close to time, Amanda? Do I still have a couple minutes?
Yep. Oh. Sorry.
These are some environmental level approaches that are really important that you as mentors can help with those teachers that may be not able to be as understanding with these kids that have gone through trauma. You can help them understand or educate them on the effects of trauma. You can help schools and teachers understand ways in which they might be depleting their self-regulation skills. And by that, I mean that these kids need a predictable and supportive environment. So help them understand that the things that you're doing in your classroom, your approaches are depleting their ability to cope or their self-regulation skills. And talk to them about that if they're open and receptive to that. Use specific examples. Number 3, you can find ways for youth to build healthy, supportive connections. Look for other students who might be positive connections and ways to connect them to those students. 4, ensure interactions build relationships. So we're trying to build them up, not break them. We need to give them consequences that make sense. This is where restorative justice comes in. They need to understand the why of consequences. So we're trying to build them up, not break them. 5, make sure the basic needs are taken care of first. So you want to, like we talked about, check the 4 S's, see if they're hungry, if they're tired, if they stayed up all night on their phone or playing video games. If they're having an especially hard day at school, you want to check those 4 S's. And then you also want to talk with parents or caregivers about how we can make sure that that's not happening consistently. Otherwise, they won't be able to function or learn at school. And 6, use inquiry to identify patterns of behavior and possible triggers in the classroom that activate the stress response. So be curious, ask questions. Is there a pattern? Does the behavior happen right before lunch every day? Does it happen at recess? Document those things, and sometimes you can identify a pattern that will help you lead you towards a plan to help these kids navigate their trauma. It's never too late. Science tells us it's never too late to build protective factors and that we can always make a difference in trauma all the way through adulthood. That's basically what this slide is telling us. So the research has shown consistently that there's no such thing as being too late to be able to intervene in trauma or be able to help build skills in people who've been through trauma. And lastly, I have 2 of these. Here's the additional resources that I promised you. We have a couple things that I just want to highlight. Complex Trauma Guide, the resource guide that I talked about is right there from the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. Amanda will send out this PowerPoint and you can just click on the link, and it's a guide you can even go over with the kids, print it out and go through it with them. And it has some great activities in there to help them identify how their trauma impacts them. We also have a trauma-informed resources list at USBE. It's a Google Doc. If you have this link, you can get right to it. So it tells you more information on trauma and different resources you can use to train others or teach others about the effects of trauma. And lastly, the trauma-informed professional learning modules, which are in Canvas. It's a great course. It's got, I think, 5 or 6 different modules and goes really in depth on trauma. Those are open and available to you to enroll in. and to learn more about trauma if you'd like. So I went really fast, and I don't know that we have any time for questions, but I'm going to hang around and I'll answer any questions that might come up. And hopefully I've given you some things to think about, some new concepts and some concrete tools that you can use with these kids. And yes, we'll be sending the slides out to you. And if you have any other questions, I'm open right now.
It's Amanda again, folks. We've got a minute or two before I want to pass to Clarissa. Do we have any questions you want to ask Tanya right now? Or you're welcome to think on it and email her or myself. Pop them in the chat.
I went very, very fast.
I know. I'm sorry. I made you do it.
Maybe I have more time and we can have more interaction. And unfortunately, the situation doesn't allow for that, but I'm open now, or you can email me. Also, I am the trainer that USB has identified to, once we can, be on site again and do in-person trainings. I'd be the one that would be coming out and doing those. So
I just wanted to say something, because this is very interesting to me, because most of my parents, most of my students this year, they are special ed students. And I have some moms, foster moms, that they have a special student, biological kids. So they are always comparing our students with their kids, right? They are always saying, oh, okay, my kid have autism. My kid is a special ed student. Why this kid is just so behind and doesn't understand anything and everything, like it's hard for them to understand that the circumstances, they are not the same as kids. And what you're saying right now and teaching us, it helped me to understand too, because I'm trying to explain to them, not even knowing all the things that you say, but I have been trying to tell them, you need to understand that they are different circumstances for these kids, that they had been passed. They don't have the support of their parents, things like that. I'm always trying to make them understand, but right now I really love what you were saying, and it helped me a little more to have more answers to these parents and stand up for our kids, because most of the time that's the problem that our kids have with the foster parents. I just wanted to say.
And I can tell you that foster parents go through comprehensive trauma training, but it's really hard to remember this information in the moment when a child's acting out. And so the more reminders that you can give them about this, the better. So again, reminding them that they were in survival mode. This isn't what's wrong with them. It's what happened to them or what didn't happen to them. That I found is the most powerful kind of catchphrase to help them understand. It doesn't have to do with their behavior or that they're a bad kid. It has to do with the trauma that they went through. And because they weren't able to make those developmental connections in the brain between the synapses, they didn't develop that like a normal child would. That's why you're seeing these behaviors. And the only way that we can help correct those or heal those are through healthy connections with adults and relationships. So hopefully that'll help you a little bit. And if you need help navigating that or being able to communicate that, especially to foster parents, because I have a lot of experience with foster parents, you can contact me. I did much work in the foster care community for many years. So.
Oh, thank you. I will if I need it, and I will be, reaching for more information too. But it helped me a lot. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
All right, I'm going to jump back in and be naughty and mute everybody. I'm going to try and share my PowerPoint again so I can introduce Miss Clarissa Stebbing. Bear with me just a moment here. Oh, where did it go hide from me? Oh, I minimized too many things. Bear with me. Open that over here. All right. This is definitely a little different for me than the WebEx that I'm more familiar with, so I'm still learning as I go here. Okay, I'm hoping you're seeing the complete slide this time. I didn't realize last time you were seeing my presenter mode, but anyway, Clarissa Stebbing is a prevention specialist at USBE. She didn't add in here, but I know from supporting her, she came to us last fall, and she holds a master's degree in health promotion and education and is a certified health education specialist. Her focus at USBE is primarily on substance abuse prevention, and she is responsible for the coordination of the statewide underage drinking and substance abuse prevention program. That's a mouthful. Prior to joining the prevention team at USBE, Clarissa spent 11 years working at a nonprofit mentoring organization where she coordinated mentoring programs at partnering elementary schools, community-based programs, and partnered with other substance abuse prevention and intervention community organizations. She also had the opportunity to be a mentor to a precocious, fun-loving student over the 5 years. She loves traveling, hiking, and yoga, and going out to eat with her family and friends. Clarissa's been a lot of fun to work with, and I will stop sharing and go ahead and turn it over to Clarissa.
Thanks, Amanda. Just wanted to pop in with my video for a minute. I will be turning my video off for the presentation. Just want to make sure I have plenty of internet connection. And so for the sake of that, I'll probably just turn my video off. But as Amanda said, I did come to Utah State Board of Education from a mentoring organization. So I have seen firsthand the amazing impact that mentors can have on the students that they're working with. So I just wanted to thank you, whether you are a mentor by official title or just by a mentor through your actions. Thank you. I know the work is not always easy, but I know that it is a very important work. Like I said, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my video for a second, or for the remaining of this time. And I wanted to, I'm actually really excited to talk to you today about motivational interviewing. I love this topic. I was first introduced to motivational interviewing while taking a course on behavior change theories while in grad school. And since then, I've taken every opportunity to learn about it through conferences, breakout sessions, webinars, books. I love learning about ways that help people make changes that are going to benefit them. And motivational interviewing is considered evidence-based. It's been shown to be able to do that, to help people make change in their life. So there's actually a lot that we could cover on the topic of motivational interviewing, similar to Tanya and her quick overview of trauma. But today we're just going to do an overview. So if after the presentation is over and there are certain areas of motivational interviewing that you would like to learn more in depth, let Amanda know. And I didn't talk to Amanda about this ahead of time, but I imagine that that's something that maybe we could work out. So for today, we will give you some background, or I will give you some background information on motivational interviewing. I'll do an overview of the spirit of motivational interviewing, the 4 processes of motivational interviewing, and then we'll cover some of the core skills that are used in motivational interviewing. And then we'll end with an example where you can actually see motivational interviewing in action. And I imagine we will have time afterwards for questions. So one thing I did want to mention before we jump right into this is, I know that a lot of you are mentors working within the Check and Connect program, and the skills used within motivational interviewing should fit nicely within that. But if you find that there's something that doesn't fit into it, just stick with fidelity of the Check and Connect model, and only use the skills within motivational interviewing as you as it fits into that model. All right, so let's start with some background information. What exactly is motivational interviewing? So clinical psychologists William Miller and Stephen Rolnick, who developed motivational interviewing in the early 1990s, defined motivational interviewing as a collaborative, goal-oriented style of communication with particular attention to the language of change. It is designed to strengthen the personal motivation for and commitment to a specific goal by eliciting and exploring the person's own reasons for change within an atmosphere of acceptance and compassion. Or more simply put, it's an effective way of talking with people about change. So how do we know that it's effective? There have been hundreds of trials where motivational interviewing was used as a method of behavior change. And time after time, researchers found that motivational interviewing was effective in eliciting a change. Motivational interviewing is used in all kinds of settings, from dentist offices to, try and encourage people to maybe floss more, or to physicians' offices, substance use treatment centers. Even the career coach I once worked with used this technique. So motivational interviewing is used to help a person get out of the state of ambivalence about making a change. And ambivalence is basically mixed feelings. So for example, let's say that you're working with a student who has been in the habit of not doing their math homework. Internally, they may have reasons for why they want to start doing their math homework, as well as reasons for why they don't want to start doing their math homework. So in other words, they're ambivalent about completing their math homework. Motivational interviewing encourages that student to vocalize the reasons why they believe doing their homework is in their best interest. And then in turn, that should increase the probability that a change will occur because they voiced it, and then they'll start doing their math homework. Okay, so let's move on to the spirit of motivational interviewing. And this is really important. Motivational interviewing is not to be used as a way to manipulate someone into doing something you want them to do. It's not a sales tactic. It is working in partnership with a person with acceptance of who they are at and where they are, who they are and where they are at in their journey of change, and genuinely showing compassion. It's evoking their reasons for why they want to change, not sharing the reasons why you think that they should change. And it's important to just remember to be genuine throughout this process. So let's talk partnership. In the spirit of motivational interviewing, you see the person you are working with as a partner. You collaborate together rather than telling the other person what they should or shouldn't do. And you avoid falling into what is called the expert trap, meaning in the spirit of partnership, rather than saying things like you should do this or you really need to do this, you might change that language to something like, for example, other students I work with have found that setting an alarm clock helps them get to school on time, and that's been helpful for them. What might work best for you? So remember, the student you are working with may already have ideas for potential solutions. And another example of a mentor statement that illustrates partnership is, you'd like to bring up your math grade. If you think it might help, we could brainstorm a list of potential action steps and see what you'd be interested in trying. So in the spirit of partnership, you're also keeping in mind that ultimately the student you are working with has a choice, and making changes is that student's responsibility. The second concept within the spirit of motivational interviewing that we'll discuss is acceptance. And as the developers of motivational interviewing have said, when people experience being accepted as they are freed to change. A mentor communicates acceptance to the student they are working with when they communicate absolute worth, accurate empathy, autonomy support, and affirmation. So the mentor recognizes and emphasizes the absolute worth or inherent value and potential of every human being. So the student that you're working with might be failing all of their classes. They might constantly be getting into fights, but their inherent value is still there. They still have potential to change. So that's absolute worth. A mentor can communicate accurate empathy by perceiving how a student is feeling and reflecting back to the student that feeling. So, for example, they may truly feel like, the student might truly feel like they have a teacher that is out to get them, and a mentor practicing empathy would acknowledge that. They might say something like, so you're feeling like this teacher isn't treating you fairly, and that's really frustrating for you. Autonomy support kind of goes along with what I mentioned in the previous slide on partnership. It's communicated, autonomy support is communicated when the mentor accepts and confirms the student's right to choose their own actions. And affirmation takes place when the mentor looks for and acknowledges the student's strengths and efforts. The third concept within the spirit of motivational interviewing that we are going to discuss is compassion, which is the genuine concern for the suffering of others. And one way to look at this is, remembering the information that you've learned about trauma-informed care, and having that lens helps with compassion. Mentors can also convey compassion by giving priority to the student's needs, actively promoting the student's welfare, and themselves in the student's shoes. So a student you are working with might voice many reasons why it's difficult to make a change. They may not be responsive, or they may not follow through, which can get incredibly frustrating over time. And it can become easy to view the challenges that student expresses as just excuses. And then we might start to lose compassion. However, by attempting to put yourself in a student's shoes, to understand all of the variables at play, and to recognize that they do have valid barriers and concerns, you're more likely to be able to feel that compassion. The final concept within the spirit of motivational interviewing that we'll discuss is evocation, which is when the mentor elicits the student's personal motivation for change. So let's start with an example. Let's say the student you are working with is not turning in their homework assignments. You could, as the mentor, could probably come up with and voice several reasons why that student should change and start turning in their homework assignments. But is that going to motivate them? It might, but not necessarily. You might bring up reasons that they don't really care about. But when you ask the right questions, and the student is able to voice their own reason to change, they hear themselves voice their true beliefs, and by voicing those true beliefs, they're more likely to feel ready and motivated to change. And then in addition, now you also know where they're coming from and what motivates them rather than just guessing, and this knowledge enables you to be even more effective as their mentor or teacher, however else you, whatever other role you have in their life. So let's say that you have a 30-minute check-in with your student that you're working with. If you were to implement motivational interviewing, there'd be 4 processes that you would be incorporating into that meeting. You would be starting off by engaging, and then focusing on topic, evoking change talk, and then planning for that change. So engaging. This slide is a list of action items to consider covering in a visit. You're engaging the student by giving a warm greeting, making introductions if you haven't met before, asking rapport building questions, giving an overview of what to expect, and determining the purpose of the day's visit, so setting that agenda. And of course, your first visit is likely to look different than your 5th visit. And one thing I do want to emphasize is that taking the time to build rapport is time well spent, since relationship and trust building is a really big key to success in bringing about change. And I thought it was worth taking a minute to discuss re-engaging. You might find that the student that you're working with may start out engaged in a meeting with you, and then they seem to become unengaged. It's a good idea to pay attention to their body language and mood. So did they all of a sudden cross their arms and lean back? Are they avoiding eye contact? Do they seem upset? If you notice that something might be wrong, go ahead and ask them about it, which will give you the opportunity to understand what's on their mind and then correct course if needed. So here on the slide are some examples of something you might say if you've noticed that something might be wrong or that they've disengaged from the conversation. So you could check in with them by asking, hey, I get the feeling that I've said something that made you uncomfortable. What's going on for you right now? Or you could say, I can sense that you don't like that suggestion I just made. And then give them the opportunity to respond. You could also say, let me check in with you. What are your thoughts and feelings about what I just said? And then I'm sure you can come up with lots of other ways that you could re-engage a student through a question or a statement. So once a student is engaged, you can move on to focusing on a topic of discussion that's going to help the student reach their goals. It's best to tackle one topic at a time and work through motivations and barriers on that single topic. Making one change, and you might have noticed this in your own life, making one change is typically less overwhelming than making a bunch of changes at once. And it's also more likely that the student will find success in making change if there's just that one thing that they can focus on. So ask the student what changes, if any, they're interested in making. When you give the student the option to select the focus of the session whenever possible, you maintain that spirit of autonomy that we talked about earlier. You're also giving them that ability to make choices, and this may increase their reception to discussion of other topics in the future. Also, if they start by making a change that they are confident that they can make, this confidence may help them succeed. So they're more likely to be successful if they're confident that they can do it. And then in the future, they're more likely to succeed as they attempt to make other changes because they've known success before. So when they do select a topic of change, ask them why they picked that topic. So let's say you have a student and they're failing 5 classes. Maybe you ask them, okay, which class are we going to start with? Which one do you want to focus on first? And then ask them, why did they pick that? Okay, so you picked history. Why did you pick history? And that can, when they vocalize why they picked that one, that can give you a lot of insight, which again can help you as you work in partnership towards that change. All right, so evoking is the 3rd process that we'll be talking about, which this might sound familiar to you. And evoking or evocation is also included in the spirit of motivational interviewing. And so as you might have guessed, this is a really important part of motivational interviewing. Because so as much as possible, you want to evoke change talk, especially when they seem to have mixed feelings or they're ambivalent about change. So you can do this, you can evoke change talk by asking the student what might be some reasons to change, or how might their life be different if they were to make a change? How does a change align with what they value most? You can ask very specific questions that help get them thinking about the benefits of making that change. A student is most likely to stick with their change if they agree to it. So it's a good idea to assess for readiness to make that change. And you can do this by asking them on a scale of 1 to 10, how interested are they in making a change at this time? And then asking follow-up questions can also be helpful. So if they tell you that their interest level is at a 5, You can ask them why they picked a 5 versus a 3 or a 4, which not only helps you understand where they're coming from, but it is an opportunity to elicit more change talk. And then also use open-ended questions to invite the student to consider their personal interests and motivation for behavior change. And then if you can see that they're ready for a change, you can move on to that planning process. Okay, so when ready to plan, creating a SMART plan, a SMART goal that is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely is recommended. And I think that's what they recommend in the Check and Connect program as well. In the spirit of motivational interviewing, the mentor acts as the guide and the student as the expert in creating a plan for themselves. However, there might be times when the student that you're working with really just doesn't have any idea on how to make a change or where to begin, so they might need extra help in creating that plan. And then at the end of the appointment, it's recommended that you gab with them. So you're inviting them to repeat their goal. You are assessing their confidence. So you can do this with a scaling question, kind of how we talked about earlier. So you could say, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the highest, how confident are you that you can get to class on time every day next week, for example? And then you can invite them to share any barriers that they anticipate and consider strategies on how they can overcome them. So when you go through this process, you're really setting them up for success as much as possible. You're anticipating what are their challenges, and what are we going to do when those challenges come up, those barriers. All right, so let's talk about the core skills that you're using in motivational interviewing. And these are skills that are not just used in motivational interviewing. You may have heard about the term ORS before. These are skills that are used in motivational interviewing and in other settings as well. So you're asking open-ended questions, you're providing affirmations, you're providing reflections, and summaries of what the student has shared. So open-ended questions are preferred to closed-ended questions because they're more likely to evoke change talk than closed-ended questions. One way that you can turn a closed-ended question into an open-ended question is to try using a sentence starter, such as how, what, why, or tell me. And tell me is not really a question, it's a statement, but it is a good way to encourage a student to elaborate. So tell me more about that. One word of caution while on the topic of open-ended questions. Why questions can come across as condescending or judgmental. So if you're going to use them, be aware and careful of your tone. And you might just figure you can get the information by using a different sentence starter than why. A good rule of thumb when it comes to questions is to have 70% of them be open-ended versus closed-ended. Okay, so when you hear one-liners, so let's say you ask an open-ended question and the student just comes back with a really short line. It really doesn't give you a lot of information or insight, and you want more information. There are certain things that you can do to get additional information. And I know from my experience with working with teens especially, or kids who are a little more shy, this is not uncommon to get a one-liner, even when you ask a really good open-ended question. So one thing that you can do to get more information is to provide a reflection to their statement. So they might say something really short and concise, like, I don't like doing homework. And you could say, okay, you don't really enjoy doing your homework. And then that kind of opens them up to elaborate a little bit more. You could also follow up with open-ended questions to further explore meaning, like by asking them how so, or what about that is important to you? What's that like for you? How does that make you feel? And then also the statement, tell me more about that's also a really good statement to follow up with when you would like to have more information. And take the time to completely understand where they're coming from. They might have more complicated feelings on a topic, and it might take them time to explore. They may be very unsure, and so just take the time that you need to explore a specific topic. So the second skill that's often used in motivational interviewing is affirmations, or in other words, you're sharing a positive statement about the person that you're working with. Affirmations are important in motivating behavior change because sometimes the lack of confidence in being able to make a change that's holding someone back from even trying. And so mentors are in a really powerful position to be able to find and vocalize the strengths of the students they work with, and should constantly be looking for what each student is doing right, what they've accomplished, and how each student is capable of achieving the goals, and then sharing that out to the student. So here are some examples of some affirmations that you could point out. You could say, oh, I can see that you really care about people, or you stuck to your goal even when it was challenging to do so, or coming here took courage. It's important to be genuine when giving an affirmation, and also make sure that the affirmations are fit in with the context of the conversation. So it's just not something completely out of left field, that it makes sense within what you've been talking about. So reflections are basically repeating what the student is thinking and feeling back to the student, and is probably the most widely used motivational interviewing skill. And remember, reflections are not just randomly repeating what a student says, but they're strategically placed to emphasize the student's ambivalence, strengths, and desire to change. And it's not like you don't have to, so I have a mirror here, but you're not repeating exactly what it is that they're saying. You're repeating back the essence of what they're saying, the thought or their feeling behind their statement. And that state and the reflection, again, you're using it as much as possible in a strategic way so that you're emphasizing their desire to change, their strengths, or even their ambivalence. So some examples of reflections, I've got some starters here, but I'll fill them in with something that might be relevant to the work that you're doing. So you're really excited about making a change, but you're worried that your friends won't be supportive, or you're wondering if it's too late to catch up on your missed homework assignments. Reflections should be concise, so limit it to a sentence or two, and remember to reflect when you hear change talk, ambivalence, or sustained talk, which is basically, sustained talk is talk that they're considering not making a change, is basically what that is. It's the opposite of change talk. And reflections ensure that, one, you understand the student correctly, and two, it's an opportunity to invite the student to elaborate. All right, so summaries are longer than a reflection statement, and they provide the student with a full view of the important pieces of what they've shared with their mentor. Good times to provide a summary might be to communicate interest and understanding, to transition from one phase of an appointment to another, to bring the student back from off-topic tangents, and to highlight student ambivalent, to reinforce change talk, and to wrap up a meeting. Remember to only summarize the student's essential thoughts or feelings that will move the student toward thinking about or committing to a behavior change. Summaries Summaries don't need to have an opening line, but the following could be used. So you could start off by saying, let's see if I have it all, and then go into the summary. Or in considering all you've just told me, it sounds like. You could also consider closing a summary with statements such as, did I get it all, or did I miss anything? So let's say, I want to give an example. Let's say that you've been having a conversation about the student that you're working with going to all of their classes every day. An example of a summary in that context might be, so you've already had that conversation, you've been talking about it, and at the end of the meeting, you might say something like, sounds like you have mixed feelings about change. On the one hand, you have some classes that you are really excited about, and you can see how going to school is going to help you in the long run. On the other hand, you have a few teachers that you feel are giving you a hard time, and it's hard to say no to your friends when they want you to skip class with them. We've talked about other times in your life when you voiced your opinion to your friends, and also how you want to bring your GPA up so that you can try out for the basketball team. Did I miss anything? So as you can see, a summary is considerably longer than a reflection statement, and it's covering a lot of the conversation. You're hitting those high points. Okay, so for those of you who are trained in the Check and Connect program, in the Check and Connect Implementing with Fidelity manual, that's the blue book, there's a good example of a mentor applying motivational interviewing core skills on pages 56 and 57. And so I just took a picture of it here, at least a part of page 56. And I've kind of highlighted some of those key core skills. So you might remember, depending on how long ago your training was, in this example, a student, Alex, misses school several days a week due to missing the bus. And as a result of Alex's absences, a few teachers are not accepting Alex's assignments. So in the example on pages 56 and 57, there are quite a few examples of open-ended questions, reflections, and then there's a summary example on page 57. The mentor in this example also reflects the spirit of motivational interviewing in their interaction with Alex. You can see the spirit of partnership when the mentor invites Alex to come up with solutions to the problem. We can see acceptance when the mentor validates Alex's autonomy and right to choose. We see compassion when the mentor acknowledges Alex's feelings. And we can see the mentor evoking change talk from Alex. So I invite you to take a look after this presentation, whenever you have time, take a look at page 56 and 57 and refresh your memory. This can be perhaps useful for you in the future as you work with your own students who might benefit from this type of approach. Okay, so now that we've talked about the key points of motivational interviewing, I wanted to show you an example of motivational interviewing in action. And so in the interest of time, we're only going to see an example of effective motivational interviewing. However, if you're interested to see how the same conversation changes when the spirit of motivational interviewing is not adhered to, in the next slide, I've included a link on the reference slide that you can watch later on. The video is an example of a youth minister speaking with a student, but I think the producers of this example could have easily replaced the noun youth minister with mentor, and it's basically the same idea. I think you'll find it just as applicable. So as you're watching, look for specific examples of what we talked about today. So do you see the youth minister following the spirit of motivational interviewing? Is she showing partnership, acceptance, compassion, and is she evoking change talk? What core skills is she using? Do you notice open-ended questions, affirmations, reflections, and summaries? And then what about the 4 processes? See if you notice her engaging, focusing, evoking, and planning. So why don't we go ahead and just on your own, go ahead and watch this video. It's a little less than 12 minutes. And then when you come back, when you come back, I guess do what we did with Tanya's presentation. You can type in the chat box that you're back. And then Amanda, I don't have the chat box open, but have you posted that? Yes, okay, so the video link is in the chat box. Okay, it sounds like a lot of you are done. We will move on then. If you're not finished yet, go ahead. I imagine you're almost finished, so go ahead and pause and can just wrap it up at the end. So that's basically where I wanted to end today. I did want to point out a few references so that these are some of the videos or books that I referred to during this presentation. So if you would like to learn more about motivational interviewing or more in depth, feel free to read some of the books or review some of these videos. And then I thought we could just open it up to some questions.
So this is Amanda. If you guys want to unmute yourselves, you can do that. Otherwise, you can put the questions in the chat box and then Clarissa will respond that way.
Clarissa, this is Heather Norda. I was thinking as I was watching that sometimes there has to be maybe some type of level of trust or relationship that's a little bit established for someone to trust you enough to open up in that interview. And oftentimes, you know, we've known this student for a very short period of time. So I wondered maybe if you could share some suggestions on how you build that trust maybe a little quicker even than what is natural, just because we don't have a lot of time sometimes when we're put into those positions to have built that relationship.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And you're right. This example from the video, obviously this youth minister has had a relationship with this student. And so she, it makes it a little easier for him to open up. So I would say that regardless, rather than jumping right into, hey, I saw your Facebook, I noticed you've been drinking, really do take some time to get to know a student. And I think as you work through the processes that are within the motivational interviewing, the spirit of motivational interviewing, of you're talking to them in partnership, that you're acknowledging that you accept them and you have compassion for them and that you recognize their autonomy and their choice. Those, when you show those elements and demonstrate those elements, they're going to be more likely, in my experience, to open up and to share. But if they see you as only an authority figure, only somebody that might be out to get them or to punish them, then I think that's when they're going to withdraw. So I think a big part of it is letting them open and talk and to just, and ask questions about, I think a big part of it is the questions piece, where you're asking, hey, tell me more about what you were thinking when this happened, or or just simply tell me about what happened, versus something like, why are you always fighting? Or why are you fighting again? And, you know, so I think it's a lot of it is the questions that you ask. I also think that it might be helpful to open that question up to other mentors. What have you done to establish rapport very quickly so that a student feels more comfortable opening up? Is there anybody that would like to respond to that?
I'll help out a little bit here, Clarissa. I think that what I've learned, especially over the last 3 years in getting my master's of social work and practicing with kids, is that the more you can demonstrate empathy towards them, the more they'll open up with you. And like we kind of talked about with the trauma stuff, the context of the relationship is where the healing occurs. And so it is definitely important that you build a rapport with them and build the relationship with them. But I think there are methods that you can do it quickly. You have to be genuine and real with them, because they can tell when you're not. And if you're being genuine and real and empathetic with them, chances are they will open up to you. It might take a few sessions. Sometimes with some of them, it takes a little bit longer. But eventually, if you're there for them, especially in a moment where they've had an issue or a problem and you're there for them, then they'll be more likely to open up. And also you can talk to them about vulnerability and the importance of them being brave and opening up and vulnerable, and let them know that you will never break their trust, that they can be vulnerable with you, and you'll honor that for them. And I've just seen kids respond really well to that. So
thanks, Tanya. That's helpful. It looks like Brian put in the chat box, a lot of these techniques align with techniques that counselors use as well. At what point would you suggest to the mentor that they suggest bringing in additional help when the mentee is presenting a problem that's getting beyond their ability to help? I think that's a good question. If you're, I think right there, if you as a mentor are starting to feel like, okay, this is beyond me, if you're starting to feel that, I think that that's a big cue to bring in a counselor, somebody who is more trained in what it is that the student may need help in. I think keeping in mind that because yeah, you are a mentor, you're not a therapist, and so it's remembering that too. So if you're starting to feel like, okay, this is turning into therapy, definitely that's another point in which you'd want to bring in somebody else to help. Also, and maybe you're referring to a student who's drinking and going off the video. If you can see that it is excessive drinking, if it's interfering with their life, then at that point, absolutely, they may need more help, and I would involve the school counselor in on that, and they may recommend other resources and treatment.
Can I talk?
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that one of the things that I do with my students, and it helped me a lot, is whenever the principal or the counselor call me because it's a problem with my students, I always request to talk to them first, alone, to know what is happening through them, even the counselor or the principal or the school staff is explaining to me what is happening. For me, it's very important he can see that I'm interested on her part, or my student part, and try to comfort him or to support during this time that everybody is into him and why he's doing this, because sometimes it's the second or the third time that he's doing that, whatever he's doing. So it's important for me to connect with him first and see how he's feeling too. After that, we can get together with all the team at the school that is waiting for us, to talk, because I'm always doing team meetings there, to figure it out how we can help my students. So for me, it's a very important thing that he knows that I care about how he feels and how, and we can find a solution before we talk to everybody, So I don't know, it's working for me a lot.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think our students want to be understood, to know that they're heard. And when you, before bringing everybody else in, have those conversations and listen, I think that's very helpful. Kay Russell says, I always make sure they know I do not know how they feel, but that I would love to get to know them, and together we can figure out what we are going to do. Ask them how I can help them. They always know that they can get in touch with me through their principal, and I always introduce them to the principals. Also, most of our students are in outside therapy, so I always contact a caseworker to get in touch with their therapist. That's great. Thank you. That's really good advice.
Yeah, I want to just quickly add to that. That it's really important that you do not panic if they start to disclose something to you.
Yeah.
They will feel your panic and they will shut down. So what you can do is use reflective listening, like Clarissa's been talking about, and you can say, wow, that must be really hard for you. I just can't even imagine what that must be like. And I don't have the answers for you, but I know let's make a plan of how we can help you. So let's get in touch with your therapist. Let's talk with your caseworker. Those are the types of things, but just do not panic, because that's the fastest way to get them to shut down. If they feel like you can't hold their trauma and honor them, then they will just probably not share anything further with you.
Thanks, Tanya. That was really helpful.
This is Tracy Deemer. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Tracy.
Hi. Just for the first meeting, I do active listening, but a really good icebreaker is to have some snacks or some treats that takes the mood out of being stressful, and then you have them tell you about their lives, or kind of, where are you from, what's your worries about today at school. And they seem to be less stressful if you're less stressful. They're just acting casual. Then the next meeting, you can bring in those things that they talked about so that they know that you actually listened, and maybe, are you feeling better at lunchtime or stuff like that.
Thank you. I agree. It can be less intimidating if they have something to be doing with their hands, at least, while having a conversation. All right, well, we're at 11 o'clock. Amanda, is that when we're supposed to end?
Yeah, I just was enjoying the conversation, so I was letting you guys go a little further. So thank you, Clarissa and Tanya, for presenting today, and thank you to everybody for participating. In the chat, I just put the link to the post-training survey. Oh, and let me go ahead and share my screen so that you can see that also in the PowerPoint. Hang on just a moment here. All right. I'm hoping that you're seeing that post-training survey link. I will send it out in an email also, which will be something you can just click on to access if that's easier for you. I also wanted to mention we have at least 3 more sessions scheduled. The next one will be on May 27th, and we'll hear from one of our own, Trina Cotterman, who is a mentor at Granite School District. as well as Corby Eason, and he will be talking about human trafficking warning signs, human trafficking and warning signs of abuse. Thanks again for everything, and please take the survey and share any feedback you have about what we could do for you for future trainings. One of the questions on today's survey is about perhaps extending the time, and since we've gone over today, I'm wondering if that's the way we're going to want to go. Anyway, again, thank you so much, and you're welcome to email me or Tanya or Clarissa if you have any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.